This Week in Jacksonville. And welcome to our show today. Governor Rick Scott's proposed budget. It's asking for a $200 per student increase. Nearly $600 million of the increase would come from local taxpayers and what's known as the required local effort. So the plan doesn't increase property owners' millage rates, but it does use the growth in property values to fund schools. The Senate Budget Chair, Rob Bradley, is from Fleming Island, and he says that doesn't qualify as a tax increase.
We're very committed in the Senate to K-12 education. An important part of that commitment is making sure that we have the RLE, and so that it's not a tax increase. I agree with the governor.
And whether or not paying more is a tax increase or not, it's been a point of contention between the lawmakers last year, the year before. So this morning, Rick Mullaney, our political analyst on News for Jax, join us, and this gentleman with us, a state representative, Richard Corcoran from Pasco County. More than that, this is the Speaker of the House in the state of Florida. Appreciate your time. Great to see you.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So the calendar has that January 9th circled on it because that's when the legislative session begins once again here. Governor Scott's announced his proposed budget. This is something that both the House and the Senate are thinking about right now. Let's start there. What are some of the priorities you have going into January?
We're going to focus again on the stuff that really matters and partner with Governor Scott. We are now, out of all 50 states, #1 in fiscal health because over the last 7 years, he got elected in 2010, I got elected in 2010, we've cut over $10 billion worth of taxes. We've rolled back over 5,000 regulations. We've transformed educational opportunities. Those are the things that allow us to keep growing as a state and flourishing and being #1 in fiscal health. And just to put it in perspective, you take New York, California, Pennsylvania, they're in the bottom 5. The closest one to us is Texas of our size, and they're like 27. I mean, for us, #1 is a real compliment to the leadership and Governor Scott's helped to provide over the last 7 years.
Well, as we've gotten to know each other in the last year or so, that's certainly been something that you say is important. You've always got to look at what's the impact to the people who are paying taxes, the people of Florida. And so, Rick, maybe chime in here as well. Education is always a huge part of the budget. And as Rick and I have talked about this, sometimes it seems like one side is saying we're funding education at a higher level than ever before. The other side is saying you're not funding enough.
Well, for the Speaker, certainly in the session this year that you led, that was significant increases in education spending. Do you anticipate the same thing in this upcoming session? And what about funding for public education in the state of Florida?
Well, and this is what I say. Last year we passed the absolute most pro-parent, pro-teacher, pro-student public school bill in the history of the state, and it's been widely reported, and it gets caught up in different misnomers, but literally almost every single penny of that was over $400 million in that legislation. All of it went to, apart from a small sliver for children with disabilities, went to the public educational system. And what it said is every single child deserves to have a world-class education. The demographics shouldn't be the determiner of their destiny. If there's a school, it's failing year after year after year, we've got to take over that school, allow an operator to come in that can absolutely provide a world-class education because they have decades of experience doing so and having a 90% graduation rate, having 90% going to college. And that's what we passed. And so, and I will tell you, last year you take those funding, absolutely the most money ever spent in public education in the history of the state of Florida, accounting for inflation. It was a remarkable year.
Yeah, well, here's more of the school funding discussion. I want to get you to weigh in on this, but Janet Cruz, the House Democratic leader, and here's what she said earlier this month. She said, when Republicans secretly crafted the largest attack on public education in Florida since the passage of the original voucher law, Democrats on the side of our children, parents, teachers to oppose House Bill 7069. I cannot overstate how devastating House Bill 7069 is going to be for our public schools, and I stand with the districts suing over this monstrosity. So, Speaker Corcoran, how do you feel about it being called a monstrosity? And obviously there are school districts across the state of Florida who said, yeah, we're going the legal route to try and challenge this.
Well, first, Janet Cruz is a friend, so I'll be, and I get sometimes you got to say political stuff for political reasons, but the Democrats were included in the negotiation. It wasn't anything. Larry Lee, Chevron Jones, all these great educational leaders for the Democrats. That's how we got to the wraparound services for kids. That was an idea from Larry Lee and Representative Chevron Jones that's in the legislation, and that's a great thing. How do we get these kids who are coming to school and they're not even fed? What services, and they can't learn when they're hungry. They can't learn if they don't have proper clothing and what have you. And so we have these services that are in that legislation that help those kids come and then be in a position to learn. But as far as the criticism, look, This is what this lawsuit's about. What that bill did is it said something that you wouldn't think was transformational. It says we're going to have the money follow the students. That's what the education's for, is for the kids, instead of it going to bureaucracy. And what they're fighting over more than anything else, and what that lawsuit's about, is their capital money. And I'm telling you, Kent, go from all the way to Miami-Dade to Escambia County, from Duval all the way down to Collier. They are building $100 million schools. The fact that we're building $100 million schools when that school could be built for $20 million or $15 million, and the rest go back into the classroom where we know it matters, where we know that child can be impacted. Socrates used to say, I can teach history under a tree. It's not the building that matters. And that's what this bill is. Our bill was about building beautiful minds. What they care about is building beautiful buildings, and that's why we have failure factories in the state of Florida. And so now they're over that, and I promise you, Ken, they will lose. Mr.
Speaker, on that topic, House Bill 7069's got a lot of statewide attention, and the piece that seems to get the most attention, of course, is charter schools.
Right.
So can you discuss your advocacy for choice and charter schools, and how charter schools fit into this legislation?
Yeah, so this is how it started. In fact, it actually started here in Jacksonville. I just spoke to a group, but you had Mr. Chartrand and Mr. Baker. Why do you have a KIP? Why do you have a KIP in Jacksonville that has 1,000 students and a 1,200 person waiting list? Why is it in Jacksonville? Because the good charitable businessmen in this community went and bought it. They went and paid for it to come here, and now you're transforming lives. It's a B school this last year in Jacksonville. My point when I found this out was, why don't we have a KIP everywhere? Why don't we have a SEED, idea schools, uncommon schools, success academies? These are schools that are the Tom Brady's of education in low-income communities. They year in and year out have 90% graduation rate, 90% going to college. Why aren't they in Florida? And so what we did, and these are public schools. All I'm talking about is public schools. So what we did is we went to those guys and we say, what takes it for you to come to Florida? And they said, this is what it takes. We passed that bill. And that's why we call it schools of hope. You take away and you don't give a child a world-class education, you're robbing them of hope and dignity, let alone their future. And that's just unacceptable.
Yeah.
We're the third largest state in the richest country in the world, and we can't deliver a child a world-class education? Come on.
Yeah, I was going to hear some sound here. Just one last topic before we go from the Florida Chamber. We're not going to hear their sound here, but basically the Florida Chamber said there are 41 priorities for lawmakers this year, but their wish list talked about insurance abuses, workers' compensation, insurance costs, dealing with future growth of the state. Let me just ask about what we're going to do with the immigration of so many people from Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. What do you think the state needs to do to provide some level of service, some level of care for our neighbors who need us right now?
Well, I think we're doing that now. I think Governor Scott's done a great job, even at the midst of Maria's impact. Had universities waiving in-state tuition, allowing kids to be accounted for in our K-12 system. Now we're working with Bob Cortez. We sent the House Representative sent Bob Cortez down, Puerto Rican legislator from Orlando, and delivered supplies. But now we're working with Bob. Look at that impact. How many students? Where are they? What can we do to get those kids assimilated into the classroom and not have it be a burden on the rest of the county infrastructure in terms of the rest of the kids' education? All that will be done. I don't think that's an issue. But the other one you brought up, I think, is important, Ken, is we passed out of the House insurance reform. We've passed out of the House workers' comp reform. They've both gone over to the Senate, and we can't get them to pass it. The business community, the small businesses, everybody has supported the legislation we've passed. And if we don't get that passed, the cost to premiums, all of our premiums are skyrocketing right now because we can't get that AOB reform passed. And if we get it passed, it'll save people tons of money in premium.
Well, Speaker Richard Corcoran, appreciate it, and we'll look forward to getting